Hello and welcome everyone to the annual WriteHive conference. This year is just jam-packed with a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and of course the publishing industry. If you're not familiar with WriteHive, we are a nonprofit organization serving the writing community with resources, events, programming, connections, and just so much more. The 2022 conference brings you this session, Modern Radioplays, writing a fiction podcast. And this is, if it's something that you're definitely interested on and you want more content like this, you can always check out the Word Nerd Cafe August 2021 issue with Creating an Air of Mystery. Now, today we've got 6 wonderful panelists, and we're going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. So starting with the first person I see, York, you're on my screen, so I'm calling on you first.
Hi, my name is York Campbell. I'm the writer and host of Poetic Earthlings. It's a sci-fi original anthology. And so I've been running this podcast for a little while now, and also hearing different voices as well, contributing to the seasons. Right now, currently we're on season 5. I'm recording and creating season 5. And so that's me all the way in Canada.
Oh, nice. Julie?
I'm Julie Hoverson. I've written and produced 19 Nocturne Boulevard, originally from 2008 through 2013. When I went to audiobooks for a while instead, I'm trying to make a comeback with the show, as well as with my anime-inspired original series, Fatal Girl, which is also an audio drama. I source back to writing for TTRPGs and other things like that before this all came along. So I'm sort of an old timer.
Lovely. Glad to have you. Caitlin?
Hi, I'm Caitlin, or K.A. Statz, and I am part of Fool and Scholar Productions. I am the writer, and I write The White Vault, Vast Horizon, Liberty, Don't Mind, Cruxmont, and whatever else that Fool and Scholar will be putting out in the future. And that is me.
Awesome. Jordan?
Hi, my name is Jordan Cobb. I am a New York City-based actress and writer. I am the founder of No Such Thing Productions, and we produce the sci-fi horror series Giannis Descending and the underwater action-adventure series Primordial Deep. Yeah, that's pretty much me.
Leslie, why don't you go ahead and start with introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you?
Sure thing. So I'm Leslie Gideon. I'm a writer and voice actor based in New York City, born and raised Latin American. I've been working in podcasting since 2018. And as I went through the ranks, I eventually decided to develop my own audio drama podcast, The Path Down, which released in 2019, which is a sci-fi slice of life audio drama about grief, privilege, and superpowers. And ever since then, I've worked in writing both as part of different teams, as part of a guest writer in audio drama podcasting ever since.
And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Rhea Werner. I'm an indie creator, so I make a couple of shows. I have the Right Now podcast, which is a nonfiction show for writers and creators. I also have a fictional sci-fi show called Girl in Space, and I'm currently working on writing season 2 for that. And I'm also the executive producer of my partner Tim's show, Omen, which just came out. So that's a fantasy audio drama with pirates in it. So yeah. So hi.
Awesome. Such great and amazing work. So we'll jump on in. And my first question for the panel is, how did you get into this line of work?
So I have always really loved listening to audio fiction. I started off listening to audiobooks back when they were like books on tape. My dad and I were some of like the first people to subscribe to Audible, like been in it from the beginning. And so I was always kind of used to hearing stories growing up. And by the time I got to college, I went to NYU and I was studying acting. And my final year, I was studying film and television. And so I was sitting in a voiceover class that they were teaching as part of that and trying to think up something for another class because we have to also, write scripts. They wanted us to have like the holistic experience. We know what goes on behind the camera and in front of it, so that we know that as actors, we're the least important part of whatever's going on to tell this story. And it sort of clicked in the back of my head. I was like, oh, hang on. Script, voiceover. I've been listening to audio podcasts for at least a year now. I could totally write one of these. So I took the script that I had written for this other class and I grabbed a couple of friends and I was like, hey, do you want to create this with me? And that became my very first show, which was Here Be Dragons. We made it most of the way through season 1, but never actually completed the series. But by that point I was hooked. And so this was back in like 2016, 2017 that I got started, and I've just been going ever since.
So I started podcasting because Travis, my partner, and I, we are very much the kind of people who want to create and tell stories. We love to play Dungeons and Dragons. We love to consume media together. And at some point we decided, okay, we want to tell stories together. We want to find a hobby that we can share. And we decided to try writing a podcast because we had been listening to podcasts together as part of the many types of media that we would consume. And we started writing, and we got to the writing and producing section, and we found out that we definitely had our individual strengths. I was more of the writer and he was more of the producer, which turned out so well. And oh gosh, this was back in like maybe 2015. We put out our first show, which was Liberty Critical Research. And from that point on, we celebrated every tiny little victory along the way, 10 listeners, 100 listeners, and then more and more. And we just loved being able to tell these stories together and to spend so much time together. And it turned out that now that's our entire lives, because Fool and Scholar Productions is Travis and I, and we still just get to tell stories and have fun every day and entertain.
So I started out as a nonfiction podcaster in 2015 with the Right Now podcast. And I remember thinking like, oh, I love speaking into this microphone and I've always been a writer. I should combine the two things. And, very, I don't know, just egotistically thought that I had invented audio fiction, like everyone does every week. And so I just, I wrote up a little script and I started reading it into my microphone and I was like, this is really, really, really fun. And I had never jumped into this. I had no idea what was in store for me. I had no idea what producing a fictional podcast was compared to the nonfiction side. And so I just learned that as I went, and it was fun and horrifying and all of the things. And I just kind of treated it like an experiment. I just wanted to see what would happen. And it ended up becoming my life. And it's been so beautiful.
I first started as a fan when I was in college. I stumbled across a very popular podcast called Welcome to Night Vale. A lot of people who are in audio drama fiction podcasting are very familiar with it. And from there, I kind of fell down the rabbit hole of listening to different audio dramas. And I really fell in love with all the different stories that were being told in terms of, representation of different gender and sexuality and racial identities. And seeing all the different unique stories that were being told in audio drama podcasting that weren't being told anywhere else really drew me in. So I started as a fan, and as I saw that potential for those different types of stories, I knew I had to jump in and join in and be part of, this new movement.
I've always been into radio ever since I was very young, listening to radio shows, listening to strange, phenomenal UFOs and all those kind of stories on the radio, on the AM dial late in the morning or early in the morning. Now, one day I said to my wife that I wouldn't mind starting a podcast, but I don't know what kind of podcast I should do. So she said, well, you have a lot of stories. What about if you just simply record some of your stories? And I said, okay, well, that's kind of weird, but all right, I could try it out. And so that's what I did. I started recording my stories in a very very basic. I had no technology. I was recording just on my cell phone. I didn't even have a computer at the time. I had no training. I just simply went into it. And then I learned from there how to capture an audience, how to write find my voice and fine tune everything that I did. So it started off from extremely humble beginnings, just like a lot of writers, a lot of podcasters. And then in time, I grew into what's now Poetic Earthlings. And I'm also editing other podcasts and producing other people's shows as well. But so that's how I started.
I wrote for role-playing games and I studied screenwriting, and then I realized I was never going to go down to LA and bum around starving while I tried to get somebody to read something. So I was in an old-time radio recreation group because I'm also an actor and I'm a big ham. And I'd written a couple scripts for them, but in the style of old-time radio because that's all they wanted. And a friend of mine came and said, hey, I just got cast in a podcast audio drama. They're looking for a lead female. Do you want to come and audition? And I was like, sure. So, we end up auditioning and I got the role. And then a little bit later, as we were recording an episode, one of the other actors is like, this is really fun. We should do this more often. And I'm like, I have scripts. I have a show. And then, of course, unfortunately, I had to crash course how to mix because that's, and even my earliest episodes, I think were pretty good because in my head, what I had listened to, because I didn't listen to what was on the internet. I listened to what I had always been listening to was either old time radio, full on audiobooks, or BBC Lord of the Rings. And Big Finish's Sapphire and Steel. And that was what I was aiming for, which is very high end. So I came in, brought my shows out, and then listened to other shows and went, oh, I'm better than everyone. I shouldn't say that, but then this was in 2008. I debuted in October of 2008. I just, over the course of about 5 years, I brought out 100 episodes and then I burned out really bad. Everything was just me. Yeah, I'm trying to do that again. I mean, not the burning out part.
Right.
Good.
Definitely don't burn out there. What are the elements of a fiction podcast that make it different from writing a novel or a short story?
How the audience consumes the content. It is all dialogue and sound. There is no atmospheric writing. There is no setting aside from what characters say to each other. So it's much more intimate, it's much more dialogue focused, and it's much more character focused. A strong podcast has very, very strong characters and very, very strong dialogue. And that is a heavier focus in podcasting than it is in novel writing, than it is in short stories or any other medium.
It's really interesting. I never had any formal training for script writing or screenwriting or any of that. And so I had to kind of learn to parse out what that meant. I started out as a novel and poem writer, and I learned really quickly that writing for the ear is very, very different than writing for the eye. It's just, for me, it was separating the story out into kind of three different spaces, and that was dialogue, sound effects, and then ambient/music in the background. And this is the reason that I fell in love with audio fiction and out of love with writing novels, because dialogue was always my favorite part. And I was like, oh, this is basically all dialogue. And then I just put the rest of the stuff in later, and it sort of illustrates the dialogue. And so I really appreciated that focus.
Sarah does such a great job of just hitting the nail on the head, where you go from creating for the mind's eye to creating for the mind's eye, but through a different
Yes.
And it's honestly wonderful to, I know that a lot of people here are so talented that they're actually doing a lot of their own production. But I work with Travis as my producer. So we have a great relationship in that, because we consume so much of the same material and media, and we spend so much time together. If I create something in my mind, and I'm able to get those words onto a script, he generally understands exactly what I'm trying to say, which I cannot say would be true for other people reading my script. It's definitely a different experience though, because you're not just trying to convey your characters through maybe the actions that you can talk about in a novel, or even separating them in perhaps a physical way from everybody else, but you have to be able to decide, okay, this is more about not just dialogue, but how people in reality would speak, which is a small, tiny thing for some, but a huge thing for other people. And that's been incredibly fun, including things like different languages. We were having a small discussion earlier about people wanting to learn other languages or just wanting to include languages from their culture. And it's a huge part of people's identity. And language is such a beautiful thing when you hear it, when you get to actually experience a language you understand directly into your ears in the same way that people have these parasocial relationships. It's a very calming thing, hopefully, unless, you know, it's a horror show, in which case maybe not. But getting to write for audio and dialogue is a great experience that I think is one of those transcendent things, because oral histories have been around longer than any other type of storytelling, longer than people have been putting things on cave walls. And that's just something that we get to keep doing. And again, everyone is always saying, oh, I'm the new, what is it? Like the Netflix of podcasting, or I'm making something brand new you've never heard of before. And I was like, this has been around longer than radio. This has been around longer than people gathering in pubs to read stories to one another. And now we just get to do it.
Yeah, I like what Caitlin said a lot. I think that with the audio experience for myself, I'm so used to writing stories on paper, the old-fashioned way. And so when it came to projecting my voice on a microphone, I thought about my music days, because I used to write rap songs back in the day for various rap groups. I also used to perform, but I wrote for a rap group. And so my sound, the way that I portrayed things when I started out was musical. It was very musical in my mind. And then I thought, how can I share a story, convey a message to somebody in a musical type of way? So it was fun. It was fun playing with sound effects, playing with samples, and a guitar riff here and there when somebody opens the door, unusual effects to help somebody along the story. To help somebody to see exactly how I see a scene, or just leave it up to their own imagination, their own interpretation, and to take them away into something that's sometimes daunting, sometimes frightening, and illuminating at the same time. And that's what I like about audio dramas.
For me, part of it sources back to dialogue. One reason I keep mentioning tabletop role-playing game as a background thing is because with, you know, decades of running games and influencing people specifically through dialogue, I mean, through playing characters opposite them and stuff, I think that gives me a really strong background in how people communicate, you know, with their characters, and in creating memorable characters that people can deal with, and having to play several at a time as the game master. So dialogue has always been heavy for me. In fact, even when I was studying screenwriting, it was like I had to force myself to write visuals, because that was not what interested me. It was always limited, and then I'd just go back to the dialogue. And part of it is also simply writing for myself as an actor. Whether or not I play that character, I try to give every character a fun role, for the fun, because the more fun the actors are having, that comes across in the story. A lot of audio fiction, especially fully dramatized stuff, puts you right in the action. You know, it's in media res. You're right there with the people, listening in on their conversation, following them around, picking out what they're picking out, experiencing what they're experiencing as much as possible. You know, as opposed to the one step away where you're reading a book and it's describing it and it's past tense, and it's, you know.
That Julie hit the nail on the head right there. It's you're living the experience alongside the characters, which is what I absolutely adore about this medium. I've been sort of doing the opposite of what Sarah did. So I'm moving more from writing scripts more into writing novels and prose. Again, I started with writing prose a long time ago, but that was writing fan fiction, very different kind of writing prose. But what I've really appreciated is when I'm writing scripts for audio fiction, it feels a little more immediate and a little more lived in, and I think that's also because my relationship to stories comes from my background as an actor. So I'm constantly thinking about what these people are going through and their emotional landscape that they are having to navigate, and taking the audience on that journey, I find is a bit easier for me to do when it's, two people talking to each other or just internal monologues. The way that I tend to write my scripts does also have a hint of the screenwriting background with it, or the playwriting background with it, in that I'm trying to paint worlds for people so that everyone can sort of see the same thing, so that you're all looking at the same broad strokes, because you're pulling people out of their day-to-day world. People are, going to be washing their dishes when they're listening to your story. They're going to be on their commute on the bus or the train or in the car. Almost always, when people are listening to audio fiction, they will be doing something else at the same time. So you're adding to their world. And so I like to make the additions to the regular world as vivid as possible, and being able to sort of pull people out of the everyday and allow them to just sort of suspend themselves, which is what I really appreciate about being able to do in this medium.
Awesome. That's
cool.
Very, very interesting observation, that when you're reading, you have to read. You're sitting there. It's like, I can't read and drive at the same time. I can't read and write at the same time. So that's an interesting observation, or a perspective to consider, that your shows that people are listening to, they're often listening to it in conjunction with doing other things. So
I just want to add something to what Jordan said, and I think what you said was brilliant, because sometimes when I record my shows, I'm a little bit naive. I think that somebody is listening in the most idealistic place with the best headphones, drinking ginger tea. There's a fireplace going at the same time, and they're just consuming my words, listening to every single thing that I'm saying without any type of distraction whatsoever. But that's not reality. And so I like that. I like what she said. We always have to make sure that we have to know that people are distracted. People are cooking and cleaning and driving and doing other things. They're not just solely just listening to every single word. So we have to work even harder to capture their attention,
Exactly.
to make sure that they're going to listen. Yeah, that's right. And it's very, very important. So that's great.
do you guys feel that there are certain genres that lend themselves more towards this format than others?
I can only speak to my own personal purposes for what I would prefer as a genre, but I think that the audio medium is open to every kind of possible story that someone would want to tell. People have had difficulties with certain types of very action-based stories because it's so hard for people to imagine, let's say, a fantastic fight scene or something like that. But I think it can be done. I think it just requires either the right kind of talent or something new we haven't heard yet. And every day there's so many people coming into the medium who have the opportunity to prove what I said wrong and make the best fantastic fight scene. But I think what lends itself well for me is horror, because I love playing with the theater of the mind. I believe that people will create the most terrifying thing in their own mind because of the sounds that I give them. So I think that's one of the strengths that I like to quite often utilize.
Another thing that I do right now, I was going to mention it later, is I'm also AD Infinitum, which is a Twitter feed that promotes audio dramas. And so I have a ginormous list of audio dramas. And while I haven't listened to most of them, I can tell you that there are almost any kind of genre you want to see. There's at least somebody tried it. there's at least something out there for it. There's plain romance, mystery, and there's lots of supernatural mystery, and there's 500,000 shows about somebody who went back to their hometown because of a disappearance of a relative. And I think I agree with Caitlin that, it's the things that they're going to be ruined by a visual, honestly. And that's one thing that horror lends it to audio best, because the visuals are never going to be as creepy as what's in your head. I've adapted a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's work, and it never makes it to video very well. I mean, some people have done reasonably well with it, but part of the reason why is because you lose the language and you get the visuals. And that's awkward. But you can keep the language and not have the visuals in audio. And I've done some big fight scenes, though. I mean, you cheat a little bit, you put in like voiceovers, internal monologues and stuff. Though I do know that that is one of those areas where a lot of people feel like they have to have some kind of narration to describe what's going on. When I just try to tell them, you just need to know the outcome. Really, you can hear the battle, and just, as long as you hear the people's voices, they're not dead. And that's fine.
Horror absolutely lends itself really well to the medium. I also find comedy works really well if you're leaning into, because who doesn't enjoy a good joke, And a lot of the time you don't necessarily need a visual. It's what makes stand-up so relatable across, mediums. You've just got, one person standing there on the stage telling the jokes, and you're already picturing what's going on in your mind's eye. So we're already kind of trained to do that. A lot of people, I have noticed, will start with podcasts that are leaning into, hard sci-fi or fantasy, because it's things that would cost a lot more, like comparatively, if they were to try to do it with visuals. And I actually do think the medium does lend itself quite well to things like sci-fi and fantasy as well, if you are willing to put in the time to really sketch out exactly what's going on. That doesn't necessarily mean like, every single footstep must be exactly where it goes. It's more along the lines of, you have to be willing to take the audience with you on the journey, no matter what it is that you're trying to tell, no matter what story you're trying to create for people. And audiences are smarter than we give them credit for, but a little bit of hand-holding is necessary. So long as you're leading the audience through it all, they'll follow you pretty much through whatever genre you want to take them into. You just have to be able and willing to take the time to do that.
So many wonderful and amazing things have been said already, that I think what I want to say is that if you are thinking about making a piece of audio fiction, an audio drama podcast, no matter the genre, there's so much room right now for everyone. So please go ahead and do it.
Awesome.
For myself, I do an anthology series. And so even though it's a science fiction anthology, sometimes I go off track. Sometimes I go off track and I talk about certain things, different genres. And I think with audio, at least how I'm doing it, there's a golden thread that ties in everything into a romance, into a Western, into a sci-fi opera, into all different things. It just ties everything together. And if you could do that really, really well, then that's golden. That's your golden ticket. So I think all different genres, depending on how you tell the story, would lead really well to audio. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Sarah. I'm a big fan of Sarah. I'm probably not supposed to say this right now, but I am, just in case anything happens and I get disconnected. And also I've subscribed to Julie's show as well. So 2 people on this panel, I listen to their shows. So that's my answer there.
19 Nocturne Boulevard is also an anthology. I was going to add to what he said. And I find if you have good characters that engage people, that helps a lot in getting them interested in whatever genre you're handing them. I've had a lot of times where I've gotten emails from people who are like, didn't really care for this last episode, but it wasn't you, it was just not my genre. I'll just wait till the next one, you know, because I swap out genres constantly. And it's, I mean, it's just whatever I felt like writing that week. So I have westerns and tragedies and sci-fi and, you know, some things that are just like, what the heck was that? If the writing is good and the acting is good and the characters, because the characters are what really draws, the characters and their predicament is what draws the people to want to know what happens.
Any sort of genre that is focused or can be focused on character work or a certain type of atmosphere really lends itself to audio drama podcasting. Romance, for example, where it is two people talking to each other and getting to know each other. Very dialogue heavy, works great in audio podcasts. Horror, for the same reason, it can be very easy to have that close, tight-knit, intimate psychological horror. Any genre can do pretty well in fiction, but anything really that's focused on, you know, dialogue, connection, character work is really going to thrive in audio drama podcasting.
What do you love about writing podcasts?
Oh, that I can pretty much do anything I want, and I can be any character I want within a certain amount of reason without having to put on like old age makeup and stuff. I play a lot of elderly ladies. It's one of my specialties. It's very freeing in a lot of ways because, you know, no matter what, you know, I can write just the weirdest things, and as long as I can make the story make sense, I can pull it all together. I've done stories that make no sense at all, or at least that are like as abbreviated as possible, that if you listen to the whole thing, it kind of makes sense. Bingo, the birthday clown. But also, I mean, one of the reasons I write an anthology is because somehow a half-hour story is very intuitive to me. And it probably comes from listening to old time radio for as long as I did. But I'm stretching myself into ongoing serials and things with a couple of different projects, particularly Fatal Girl, my anime inspired one. That's a 5-season, 6 hours per season opus.
Wow.
I mean, I can do incredible things without having to know how to animate it. I just have to make the sound effects.
One of the things that I noticed, and the reason that I tried audio fiction in the first place, was I noticed with my nonfiction podcast right now that I was connecting with listeners in a way that I wasn't connecting with them just by writing. It's so interesting to look at, you know, we talk about podcasting as such an intimate medium, and it really is. There's so much that comes across in a person's voice that connects with listeners. And so I think one of my favorite things is just my connection that this medium allows me to have with my audience. And it's just, I don't know, it's been rewarding. I've made friends. I don't know. It's just, it's allowed me to exist alongside my work in a way that I don't think I could have done simply having the story in print, if that makes sense.
Writing audio fiction is about the closest I will ever get to living these experiences myself, to getting to really have those sorts of adventures and live in those kinds of worlds. I feel like the song Paradise by Coldplay was written for and about me. And it invariably ends up on every single playlist that I put together for myself for whenever I'm writing one of these kinds of stories. And I'm like, telling on yourself, Jordan, you're telling on yourself. And this is also probably because I act in a lot of the things that I write. There's something about being able to pick up these scripts and live your way through them, either when you're listening to them, when you're reading them, that just feels absolutely transcendent. There's no other medium that's quite like it. Like there's always a touch of distance between yourself and a really good book or a really great movie or TV show, that there's always that physical barrier. But because you're experiencing the story at the same time as everyone who's in it. It feels like you are of it at the same time. And there's nothing else like it.
Empathy saves the species. And so when we write our material, when I podcast, it puts me into the mind of other people that are outside of where I live, outside of my dome, outside of my spectrum. And I could feel the way that they feel. When I write about a 16-year-old blonde girl that's hooked on crack, that's a story that I wrote. That's a true story. I saw her when I was working at a government site. It allowed me to be empathetic. I listened to her, and then in turn I wrote pretty much everything down that she said, and then I added some fictional elements to it. When I talk about an 85-year-old Asian man living alone by himself, waiting for an alien spaceship in the tallest mountain in the world, I could empathize with him, even though I don't share his culture, but I could understand him. So writing these stories, for me, it helps me to understand people on a deeper level, to really be there for them, to show compassion, and to get outside of my own universe.
I love everything that you guys have said. And you all spoke about how that creating and writing and putting these podcasts out into the world affect the people exterior to you, getting to connect with your audience or getting to feel that empathy for another person. And I feel like it's also important to note that by creating a podcast, there's also a lot of like internal reflection, for me at least. I never got training to write. It's not anything I went to school for. I was always very apprehensive to be creative in that way. I was always a creative person, but the idea of sharing a story I'd written with someone was close the door, lock it, it's not going to happen kind of situation. But then writing a script and having people read it, it felt more personal, but not in a very scary way. I can get up and tell you, oh, I had the strangest dream. And that doesn't feel like you're invading a book that I wrote to pull it apart. It just feels like you're listening to me. And I thoroughly believe that I would not be the creative person I am and get to tell the stories that I want to tell if it wasn't for this audio medium.
My favorite thing about writing for audio fiction dramas is knowing that there is this level of freedom that isn't around in a lot of other media, both traditional media and new medium. As I said, it's very friendly and very open to different types of stories from people from different walks of life. And a lot of representation that I had been looking for my entire life, I first found in audio drama fiction. And that's really what I love about it, is being able to listen to stories from people that I've never met, from points of view that I've never considered before. And it's very open and it's very creative in a way that I still continue to learn from this day.
What are the challenges you've faced with writing fiction podcasts?
Because it is almost entirely dialogue, is writing characters that feel like well-rounded people and that aren't exposition machines. Because all the information, or nearly all the information that an audience is going to get, is going to come from what the characters say and how they speak and what they say to each other. And it is a very delicate balancing act of making sure that your audience gets all the information they need and not turning your characters into exposition factories.
Just the fundamentals, really, of just writing. I was writing a story last night, and it takes me a very long time to write a story. It's very grueling, even though I enjoy it. It's just very, very grueling to do it. The story was coming along very well, but I was extremely tired. But even if I wasn't, I take long breaks. So I want to make sure that everything is written well. So I'll look it over, and I was saying to somebody else the other day ago, I guess it was on an interview, I try to find the heart of the story. And if the heart is not there, even if the mechanics are there, then I'm not going to record it. I'm not going to finish writing it. So I labor intensively to try to find the core element, and that's the heart. And that's really the hardest part. The other parts of the podcast, the editing, I really enjoy the editing and and everything else. But it's the actual story, getting everything written down and finding that human connection. That's the most difficult.
Yes, physically sitting down to write can be, we all know. We all know. I just saw everybody make that exact same face. We all know it's butt in chair method is truly the greatest thing that has ever been invented. Just sit down and physically spill it out all out onto the page. And then I also find there are moments where trying to convey what it is I'm seeing in my mind's eye and putting it into language that other people can understand. So I wear a ton of hats when creating any of my shows. I act in them, I do the production work, I'm the director, I do the casting. I don't do the editing, and I can't play all of the parts. That would be absurd. It'd be funny as heck. These scripts are going to other people, and so ensuring that the language that is put on the page gets to the core of who the characters are, and also so that everyone kind of has, when you hand it off to another actor, when I'm handing my scripts off to Julia, my editor, everyone else knows exactly what it is that we are all seeing together. It's making sure that everyone is on the same page from the time I put things on the page to the time it gets to people's ears. That can be a bit of a trick sometimes. A fun trick, but still a trick.
I would say for me, I find it challenging to finish things because I'm constantly getting new ideas and starting new scripts. I've got like 50 scripts that I should probably finish at some point. One of the advantages of being an anthology, however, means that I don't actually have to follow one story all the way through, as long as I have an episode ready to go. That's one reason that actually switching to a serial story, a story that continues over several episodes, is actually very challenging. I tend to challenge myself more than anything else. I mean, much like Jordan, I also am the writer, producer, sound editor. I pick the music, I cast the characters, all the way through for everything I've done. And unless it specifically mentions that I managed to fob the sound editing off on somebody else, get a volunteer. And that's the one thing I would hand over if I could. I'd rather just write and act. I tend to challenge myself because I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. By picking really strange genres and deciding to write something in them. I like that kind of challenge because I'll sit there and I'll research it, and I can put off writing for some more time while I research a genre. It's like, I got to know all of what it's like to be, what all the things are for a giallo. Yeah. And then try to find a way to make that an audio fiction. Other than that, the advantage of podcasting is there's no gatekeepers. There's nobody stopping you from making a show. So you don't actually have to impress anybody, even to start with. Anybody can put out a show, which is the lovely part about podcasting and the awful part about podcasting.
I always feel personally called out when people talk about how they can't. They're like, I can put off finishing this one to go start another idea, right? That, from the writer perspective, that's just truth. It is the hard-hitting, I'll just get another cup of tea, but I have a really great idea. I'm not procrastinating because I'm still working on something new. Yes, but from the larger scope, again, I'm very thankful and lucky that I work with Travis to create podcasts. So I don't do the sound editing or production, or we kind of split direction. He does direction when we are actually working with people in a studio digitally. And then I write a lot of directions into my script. And then we do things like character casting together. Jordan was saying earlier that she's a lot of the characters in her own shows. And I was like, Jordan's a lot of the characters in my shows too. It's because you're talented. But I think one of the things I was not expecting, especially because I wasn't expecting this to become my full-time everyday dear, oh my God, I have to write all these podcasts now, is how much work there is on the back end for the idea of if you build it, they will come, doesn't really work. You have to build it and then tell everybody that you've built it and then continue to tell people while building other things and just continuing to increase your workload down the line. So that is something I would happily move on to someone else if I could, so I could focus on writing, but it's part of any kind of self-promotion. If you're trying to be a writer, being able to say, okay, I want to get my book out into the world. I want to get my words out into the world, and I want people to see them or read them or listen to them. And it's a tough thing, especially if you're a person like me who would rather just sit in a room and write and have somebody else talk to humans for the day.
Fitting this into everyday life without burning out. I know that a lot of writers, don't write as their full-time job and also have a family and also have obligations and also run into, things like illness and car collisions and like all of the horrible things that hit us over the head every day. I haven't found any answers to that. Like, oh, what's the perfect work-life creative balance? And it ends up being a lot of sacrifice. This is my 20-year-old cat, Midori, who does what she wants. It's really difficult realizing or coming to terms with the fact that you are burned out, understanding, oh, I've overdone it and I need to stop, and not wanting to stop because this is your passion, but you're also between a rock and a hard place because you can't exactly, maybe you're not in a place where you can just quit your job. And I feel like it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. We talk about our excitement for creating, but we don't talk about the toll that it takes on us. And especially if you're an indie creator and you're wearing all the hats, like Jordan said, or if you're doing all the things, helping your audience understand, the reason season 2 isn't out yet is because I'm doing these other projects. I am also doing dialogue selection, which is invisible, to your audience, and they don't understand that it takes so long to do. They just see, 30-minute podcast episode, 30 minutes to create it. And it's like, no, hundreds of hours go into each 30-minute episode, literally hundreds of hours. And so it can get really frustrating. I feel like I'm addressing like a bunch of different challenges in one big clump, but, and the other thing is, it would help if, podcasts were not free. I love that podcasts are free, inherently free, because it's accessible to everyone, and that's beautiful. And I love it, but it also makes it very difficult to prioritize in your life if you need to pay your rent or buy groceries. So that's just a big handful of challenges there, that I've experienced and that you might experience too.
With the work-life balance and things, I am the worst with that because I get really like what I call a bee in my bonnet. What it is I just get obsessive. I have a one train mind. I have lots and lots of tracks, but I've only got one damn train. and wherever it's going is where I'm going. And I found it's just easier not to fight it. So if it says write this, I'll write that. If it says go clothing shopping,
Go do that.
I have to do that. It makes it very chaotic on my end. I am not good at the work-life balance.
How do you best promote this brand of podcast? So Jordan, I'm going to start with you. How do you promote your podcast?
That is actually a really interesting question because I feel like this is sort of the golden nugget of podcasting that we are all, running west to chase. And when somebody finds it, there's gonna be a gold rush. What I have found I enjoy the most is cross promotion with other shows. So on my particular podcasts, we don't necessarily put full episodes of other people's shows onto our feed, but that is one method of cross promotion. What I like to do is in the credits or before the actual episode starts is to shout out other people's work that I've been listening to that I really enjoy, and have other people do the same. Now you can either, talk to people on Twitter or email them and coordinate that, or you can just do it because you want to. I think it was you, Patchree, who said this earlier. People who are listening to, one podcast are often going to be listening to other podcasts as well. Julie also mentioned this as well, that, we're not competing for time slots the way that TV is. We're not competing for, bestseller ranks like, books tend to be. You can listen to one show and then immediately go into the next and the next and the next. Statistically speaking, actually, people who listen to one show will be listening to multiple others. So the more that you can kind of slide your name into their ears, or slide the names of other shows into their ears, is fantastic. It's sort of the one tide raises all boats, which is not a perfect metaphor for podcasting, but it is effective. And I have found that it's my favorite method of all, is being able to just share shows I love and hope that, or not just hope that, but also ask other people to be like, hey, share my show if you like it.
Do we struggle more as creators with the creating or the marketing?
Yeah.
So I come from a background of more than 10 years as a marketing professional before I left my full-time job to podcast full-time. And it's so interesting, the sort of avoidance or the horror that a lot of creators have about marketing. I feel like they're almost on diametrically opposed sometimes. So creators are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get into that marketing stuff because they see it as sleazy, or they see it as just the opposite of what they do when they create. I think that absolutely what Jordan said is completely, it's just so on the nose. It's doing feed swaps, it's doing cross promotions, but I wonder sometimes if creators would benefit from just learning more about marketing in general. And I know that's really hard because we're already supposed to, again, like I said earlier, take care of our family, take care of ourselves, exercise once in a while, do all the things. And it's like, I don't have time to learn marketing. But at the same time, it's so valuable. And I know that there's a definite challenge there in making those two worlds meet. But the more that you understand about what it means to market something and what it means to promote something, the more effective you will be and the more effective your time will be spent in marketing. I've noticed in indie drama, it's a lot of, because people are working with like shoestring or zero budgets, it's a lot of social media, it's a lot of promo swaps, it's a lot of like internal networking with other podcasters. But, there's also, Google ads and social media ads and doing public speaking. There are so many ways to let people know about your show. I feel like that wasn't necessarily helpful, but I would encourage you to, maybe do a bit of research about a type of marketing and promotion that would work best for your show.
I like what Sarah said about marketing and how it's not the opposite of what we're doing. We could bridge the two. There is creative marketing. And so what I've been trying to do lately, I've been putting out shows on Twitter, and these are just Twitter episodes. They're not found on Poetic Earthlings. These are just for Twitter, 2-minute episodes. And within that 2 minutes, I'm introducing certain writers from the writing community. I talk about Tiffany C. Lewis or another writer, and I spotlight them. And I do a little bit of a comedy here and there. I try to be funny at least. So I do a little bit of a comedy, and I showcase some of my show, but because the show itself, not everyone is going to go to my show, poeticearthlings.com, or listen. And I understand that. So the podcast is larger than just the podcast itself. So what I do on Twitter, it's an entire show. So they don't necessarily have to go. I like them to, but they don't necessarily have to, because within those 2-minute Twitter episodes, it's a complete episode. And then what I do is I encourage other writers. And as I said, I do shout outs. And then I do collaborations. I get together with other voiceover actors on my show, and I help out others on their show as well. Also, I do like what Sarah said about understanding SEO. I think she said that it's very important. It's not as scary as how we make it. We just have to break things down to bite-sized portions and say, I'm going to try to do a Google ad, which I tried. I'm going to try to do a Facebook ad. I tried that as well. Not as successful as a Google ad. And just little things. Also being interviewed, going on other people's shows, making yourself available to guest on other people's projects. So that's some of the ways that I'm promoting my show, Poetic Earthlings.
It is one of those things that people look at and they say, oh gosh, how do we do this? It is that what Jordan had, which I could see so vividly, this like golden nugget that everyone's running towards, trying to find. But it really is about, for me, when we were first starting, and even now, this community of people who are so willing to help each other. When I first started creating, and I was still getting used to writing, and Travis was trying to inspire me to write more, I started listening to Sarah's Right Now podcast. And it's still something that I tell other people, oh, you should go listen to this. And when they listen to that, then they get hooked on Girl in Space. And recently we're trying to move into new platforms because we're trying to reach a broader audience, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we tell people about audio drama podcasting and fiction podcasting who have never heard of it before? So we started using Twitch to talk about sound design and stuff like that. And we actually did an unboxing of the Kickstarter rewards or the Indiegogo rewards that we got from Jordan's campaign. And we have like the big blanket now hanging in the studio. And we were telling people all about her work, because it's just one of those things where we are so lucky to have a community of people who are willing and able and so lovingly open, and who create such amazing stuff that if you start to tell people, hey, they built it, you should go, and they get there and it's wonderful, then they're going to stick around. And that's somebody who might invite someone else into this wonderful like palace of audio drama. So it's about community, and no matter how many times we might, because we've tried Facebook and Twitter ads and stuff like that, but every time we sign off, we still say the best thing that someone can do is tell their friend or their family or their coworker, hey, I really enjoyed this thing I listened to. I think you'd like it. Or, man, this really scared me. I think it'd scare you too. So that word of mouth is still the strongest thing that I see pretty consistently.
Audio fiction drama is very much one of the newer forms of storytelling medium. And so it thrives a lot on social media. It has a very vibrant community on Twitter where we all connect with each other. It also has an equally vibrant and thriving community on Tumblr, and a much newer, still growing, but very unique collaborative effort on TikTok, which is something that I'm discovering and exploring a little bit more now, but it's very social media focused. And being connected to where both your audience and your fellow creators are connected is the best way to get the word out there.
When I first started out, I had 8 episodes appear in one month in the feed of Broken Sea Audio with the ever missed Bill Holwig. Basically, they put on a horror story of a day for all of Halloween, and they pulled in everybody into their feed to do that, and that was great. But it got me my start. The problem that I see with a lot of what we do with our cross promotion is that, honestly, in the lagoon, in the entire ocean of podcasts, fiction podcasting in general is this lagoon, and we're a tidal pool in the lagoon for the audio drama part. And as much as we promote to each other, it doesn't get out of there very often. And when I burned out, the 2 biggest questions on everybody's lips were, how do I monetize and how do I promote? And when I came back, the 2 biggest questions were exactly the same. You know, I mean, I was away for several years, and that was one reason I created AD Infinitum, was to at least get something going that would be promoting everybody. And you'd be surprised how many shows I get who I promote their show because I found it somewhere, and they look at where their name was mentioned and they go, oh my God, I didn't realize there were so many shows out here, because they never looked. There's so many shows. Speaking as somebody said, where they, reinventing the wheel, where they're like, we're bringing back old time radio, just like on the, back in the 40s. And I'm like, just like everybody else. Just, but and I have ideas for what I want to do with this, to take it further, to try to, but it's all about money, honestly. And marketing, part of what makes marketing so daunting is the fact that, especially when you're somebody like Jordan or me, where you're wearing all the hats, taking on another hat that's a big pile of hats. I used to tell people that I didn't want to make money, because then I'd have to be the accountant too, at least until I could afford an accountant, because that's another hat. And we get all these offers. I don't know if everybody else does, but I get them. It's like, we will promote your show for this much money, and you're like, yeah. The half of those you just expect are going to sell you bot hits or something. If we had one actual group who had success through a marketing person, that marketing person could use that connection to reach out to everyone else, and we would all jump on that bandwagon, because that would be somebody we could trust. The one thing that I will suggest that I did back in the day and I got some success with is, now just to round this all up, because I have so many things to say about this, was find podcasts that are similar to you but not fiction. I reached out to horror movie podcasts because I was doing horror stuff, and I reached out to a dozen different review podcasts, and I interacted with them. I didn't just try to get them to play my ad. I would call into their shows, or I would leave messages for them and stuff, because it's a genre I like. It's something I know about. And there were several of them that would get me on as a guest if I seemed like I knew enough about something that was coming up, and or one show that would have me on just because, as the guys jokingly put it, because they played these frat boy characters in real life. But the thing is, if you can reach outside of fiction and pull people in from there, that's going to be a longer success, hopefully, because so many people here are just kind of going from show to show already.
The theme sounds like cross promotion, and word of mouth is always going to be the magic button that gets people over to your show. But that's awesome. When you guys are producing your shows, do you use sound effects, which I think the affirmative answer, you're all going to answer in the affirmative, but do you use sound effects? And how do you incorporate them into your shows? And then are these sound effects that you're making yourselves? If not, where can people find these things?
I write sound effects into my scripts. I'm very detailed about, let's say, a character is wearing this kind of shoe and walking across this kind of flooring, or car doors have to open, people have to step out, bags have to be picked up, things have to rustle, there has to be a clack, there has to be the slamming of the door. If it's raining, then I would have said that earlier, then you have to fling open an umbrella, like all of these things will be listed. And then Travis is my fantastic sound designer and producer and partner, and he is a master of sound creation. If he cannot find it, or if he does not like what he finds, he will make it. Sometimes at a personal loss to him in some way. But it's one of those things that he loves to do. We go on several different opportunistic outings to collect sounds. We recently went into an old salt mine to collect sounds of just the ambiance of being inside the salt mine. And it's one of those fun experiences that helps to envelop you in this audio world, just to be in there and close your eyes and stand completely still, because you don't want any sound of you moving. You don't want your own footsteps, completely still in the dark, holding a microphone in front of you. And it's wonderful for me too, from the writing standpoint, because while I'm down there and we're recording for something else, I'm having brand new ideas. I'm in a brand new space. Probably other writers know this too. If you just stop and actually have to be quiet for a while, your brain doesn't stop. So I get these new ideas from hearing these new sounds and this new world. And then he's already creating the sound of the last story, and I'm writing the new one in my head. You don't have to use sounds to convey your story, but it is such a powerful tool because it is a connection to the real world. Every single time to hear something, if you hear a car slam, you know what that is, so you can vision it happening. I think, like you said, everyone will say probably affirmatively, yes, we use sound. It's sound design, sound effects, or Foley, because it is such a powerful tool.
For myself, when I started, I didn't use any sound or any music. I was a purist, I thought. I wanted just for the people to hear my words and my words only. And then later on, I said, well, I've been in music for quite some time. Would it hurt to use music? Of course not. So I started using some music here and there. And then I gotten used to it, to the point that I started to create some of my own sounds as well. And it really helped the story. It really helped the entire podcast, just to take it from where it was to an escape for the listener. The listener wants to escape into another world, and if I could create that for the listening audience, then that would be incredible. And so now most of my stories, if not all of them, is there's sound effects, there's music, but they're only used to really bring out the characters, not just for a sound effect, not just for the sake of music, but to really bring the characters out, because I really want the listener to understand what's going on, just like Susie and the Enforcer, the season finale of the season 4 finale of my show. I really wanted to capture everything. So the baby in that story was pivotal. And so I took a long time to figure out the baby sounds. It couldn't just be any old baby. It had to be the right baby. It couldn't just be her crying. It had to be the right type of crying. It had to be the right type of laughter when the baby is laughing. It's and everything else in that story is horrific because it's an apocalyptic moment. But that baby was essential, and she was a happy place. She was the heart of the story. As I said earlier on, we have to find the heart, and that sound effect with the baby, that was the heart. So yeah, I do use sound effects, but I use them to really bring out the true nature of the characters, to get people more invested in the theme of the story.
Oh yes, I use a lot of sound effects. I kind of go in a way different than Caitlin does, because for me, the sound effects serve the story, and they don't have to be specific or different. I mean, this is just the way I do it. I also have a tendency to write very, very light descriptions, because I've always written with the assumption that I was going to be stuck doing the sound work. I've discovered this when I started handing scripts to other people, and they're like, what is that? Things like footsteps. I'll use the same footsteps over and over and over again. It's like, it's on wood, it's on concrete. It's on wood, it's on concrete. It's on metal. Or doors. I decided I was going to make them an in-joke, and so I use pretty much the same doors, the same footsteps, same background street noises for most shows, just because it's just there to serve the ambiance. There's one track I picked up somewhere from like the BBC that's got like this street preacher going, "Jesus saves" in the background, and I use that in so many shows just because I think it's hilarious. When I'm making a compound effect, however, like fighting sounds for, my big anime thing, I'll often just pull in like a random 20 sounds of like a whoosh and a zip and a this and an impact and a this, and I'll just throw them all on a screen in Audacity and move them around and see how they sound and make this one quieter and that one louder and this one echo, and until it turns into what I want. It's like collage.
I actually, like Caitlin, don't handle the sound design on my own projects. And actually, we even got a little help from Travis on Primordial Deep. He gave us some truly horrifying, like, sea scorpions running around noises. It was truly one of the most upsetting things that has ever been in my headphones ever. So thank you again, Travis. You're the greatest. So when I do write sound effects into the story, because I do find that, you know, not just as ambiance, but as a part of the story, I do find they are extremely important. You know, because we are using an audio medium, I think that why wouldn't you use sound in all of its different variations to best serve and bring out the story that you're trying to tell? It's a tether, it's an anchor, as silence can be. Playing with silence as a sound effect has been one of the most effective tools that has been in my tool belt. And so it's when people are speaking, when things are happening, versus when they're not, versus when things get very quiet and very tense. And maybe you just hear breathing, maybe you just hear footsteps, and then you hear nothing at all.
Wonderful demonstration there for us, Jordan.
Thank you.
So I personally think it's absolutely vital to create a full soundscape when you're doing audio fiction podcasts. Not necessarily, you know, going all out and throwing in every sound effect, but you can really expand on the level of exposition that you can give to your audience if you utilize sound effects. Something as simple as the types of shoes they're wearing that will affect the sound of their footsteps, to the type of furniture that they walk around and use, to the soundscape. Are they in a city? Are they in a small town? There are ways that you can use sound effects and soundscaping and any sort of Foley work to expand the work and add to the richness of the world.
So 2 things for me. Number 1, less is more. I have found I am a writer first and foremost, but I do my own sound editing and sound design, and I realize I'm not great at it, so I kind of leave that to the background. Number 2, a great resource is freesound.org, where you can get a lot of free sound effects, and just making sure that you check what the attribution licenses look like on those and credit people accordingly. It's a great resource.
Do you plan your whole seasons in advance, or do you guys write and release episode by episode?
Definitely know people who do both. I personally, when I'm approaching podcasting storytelling, I plan out the entire season ahead of time. I want to make sure that there is a clear narrative flow from start to beginning. And I like having that set of the aspect all set, ready, and packaged to go, so the rest of production and post-production runs smoothly.
I plot everything out. Everything is planned. I cannot abide chaos. So that's just very simple for me.
Plan out everything. Before, what I used to do is I used to write and I used to record every single day. And that was a nightmare. That's how you get burnout. Don't do that. So what I do is I plan out the whole entire season. I write even the show notes are written. Every single thing is written, like about 10 or 12 episodes per season. And then in that way, it's way less stressful. So I do all the seasons like that now.
I'm also a planner, a header person. So I tend to do very, very rough plots, and then I'll write the full episodes for the entire season. I don't like to do like exact bullet points for every single thing that's going to happen in an episode, because I like to give myself room to maneuver and discover. And then, you're going to go back and be editing everything anyway. So that's where you go and make things make sense. And then we record everything, and then we do all the post-production.
I'm a chaos monster. And so to my detriment, it is more difficult, as York said. It's so much more difficult to sort of write as you go and record as you go. But also There really is no right or wrong way to do it. There's just the way that works for you. So I have ADHD, and it is very difficult for me to plan anything ahead of time. And so I have to do what works for me. And that is, you talk about, oh, you're a plotter or a pantser, so you're writing by the seat of your pants. I am a pantser, and it's hard, but it's the thing that works for me. So
I'm another chaos monster. Well, that's why the anthology works for me so well, is I just write the scripts, and then I'll decide what like the next 6 scripts are that I'm going to use. And that way I can be looking for music 6 scripts in advance and casting people and stuff. But when it comes to trying to do this series that I'm working on, that I keep mentioning, my anime one, I originally was just going to write 1 episode just to prove I could write something in the style of an anime. But by the time I'd finished writing it, the characters were already telling me the next 3 episodes. And then I was like, oh, well, crap, now I have to come up with a story arc, don't I? And I had this story arc, and it was like, oh, that's got to be at least 5 seasons ahead. And now I'm still filling it in. And it's working, though, because that works for me.
In terms of the last question for the panel, what is your advice for aspiring radio plays and podcast writers?
I say to anyone that wants to do this, you have to find a story that you could fully immerse yourself into. I believe that the best stories are the ones that comes from a real place. Even some of my really crazy time traveling stories, I put myself in the story. Some of me is inside of it. So I will tell somebody, there has to be a story that you could write all the time, that you could go to your microphone, that you could feel fired up, you could feel motivated. It's not something that's so daunting, that's so troubling, that's so stressful. It has to be something that you could do all the time.
Like I said, I don't think I could have been a writer or could have told stories if it wasn't for the medium that I found to get me started, because I was standing in my own way thinking that, oh, no one wants to hear the stories I want to say, or nobody wants to read these. Once I found a way not to be in my own way, and my version of finding that was having someone that I trust tell me it was worth it for me to try. That was really the biggest part for me. So if you're scared to try, but you want to start, give it a go. Don't stand in your own way. I know that sounds so silly to just be like, oh yeah, snap your fingers, change your mindset. Just try little things that make you feel like maybe one day you can do it, but don't just tell yourself no and sell yourself short. Storytelling is for everyone, because everyone has something new in some kind of new way.
I know that as writers, we think about ourselves as like sort of holed up in like a little ivory tower or, whatever, but it gets really lonely, and that can get really, really bad for a lot of us, mental health wise. And so my advice is find someone else in the community who's creating, just so you have someone to talk to, because burnout is very likely. Stress is high. So please make sure that you have a support system.
I was going to say something similar to that. Join communities, join groups. There's a large community on Facebook with Audio Drama Hub. There's a lot of people on Twitter. There's plenty of people on Reddit where you can, even if you're not ready to show your work yet, you can at least participate and know that there's other people out there. Listen to a lot of shows. Listen to shows. Find the shows that resonate for you and use that as a kind of something to emulate. I mean, walking into it without listening first is very difficult. Even if you're primarily a writer, try joining a actor reading group. Even if you don't want to read all the time, you'll hear a lot of scripts. You'll see how they're laid out. You can pick up stuff from that. And when you get to writing, just write down the page. Just don't stop to change things. If something holds you up, just put in brackets, this is holding me up, and move on to the next thing you know to write. Just keep moving forward. You can always edit later and fill in details. Just name characters Bob and Fred. If you can't think of a name right now, you can change it later. That's what search and replace is for.
Listen to as many shows as possible. There are so many different ways of approaching storytelling that are interesting and unique. But I can also understand for someone who's coming into it for the first time, it can be confusing. It can be overwhelming. You're not quite sure where to start. And the best way to learn is to see what other people have done, absorb as much as you can. I also recommend, if you're interested in becoming part of the community, go on Twitter, go on Tumblr or Reddit, connect with other content creators. Many people in audio drama podcasting are more than happy to answer questions or direct you to the right resources. There's plenty of information out there, but the number one thing you need to do before you even think about diving in to making a podcast is learning the landscape and learning what you're getting into, because it is such a new medium to a lot of people.
Do not let other people steal your joy. You're going to start with 0 listeners on something that you have poured your entire heart and soul into. You're gonna get 1-star reviews. You're gonna get people who say really unnecessarily nasty things to you online, completely unprompted. And knowing that is one thing, going through it is another. And those things that people, will say or post or whatever can stick with you for a really long time. Seeing that you've been working on this show for hundreds of hours, for weeks, for months, for years even, and only having 10 listeners or 50 listeners, 100 listeners, can really, really drag you down, especially when you're seeing in social media other people posting what feels like, larger audiences, bigger wins, and the kind of success that you're looking for. Do not read the reviews, ever. Don't do them. Good, bad, don't read them. And just allow yourself to hold space for the story that you wrote and that you love, so that you can still continue to love it and it will still spark joy within you, because that's the only thing that really matters.
That is definitely great advice for all creators, regardless of your medium. So that's, before we kind of wrap this up, I'm going to run down the line. And if you guys have something that you'd like to plug and things that you want to promote coming up, definitely let us know. Jordan, you're on my screen, so I'm going to start with you.
Sure thing. Right now we have season 2 of Primordial Deep is going to be on its way to your feed soon. So now is a great time to catch up on season 1. And also we have the sequel to Giannis Descending coming out. It's called Descendants. It's on the same feed. And you can find all of that information and more at No Such Thing Productions. So our website is nosuchthingradio.com.
Fool and Scholar Productions is all the stuff that I write. So currently we are releasing Don't Mind Cruxmont, which is our newest series. It is part 1 in a larger section of serialized anthologies of mystery and horror and such. And then we also recently just completed season 5 of The White Vault. So it is now all available for your binging pleasure.
I just finished wrapping up season 4 of Poetic Earthlings. Now, on the feed, you'll still hear episodes, but I call these ones the mothership. These are behind the scenes of how everything is made, and this is to help writers and creators to dive deeper into their own stories. So currently, that's what I'm doing. If you go to the feed, poeticearthlings.com, I'm also writing season 5. And I'm also producing a totally different kind of an educational podcast from the crime fiction author Tiffany Christina Lewis, and it's a podcast called Beta Reader Bits. It's to help people to become better beta readers. I also produced 2 seasons of an incredible author by the name of Brent Stark. He's a phenomenal podcaster. I produced his show. It's called Most Precious Commodity. It's a podcast. So the 2 seasons, they're already there as well. So that's what I'm up to. If you want to hear more about me, you could always find me on Twitter. My handle there is Poetic Earthling, or you could just go to my website, poeticearthlings.com.
You can find all of my work over at sarahwerner.com. That's SARAHWERNER.com. And my shows there are the Right Now podcast with Sarah Werner and Girl in Space.
I have The main website, which hasn't been updated since it was made on a Vista machine, is at 19 Nocturne Boulevard. That's 19nocturneboulevard.com. I have new episodes out on that you can find in most podcatchers. I've been reissuing a lot of the old episodes, but I did have a new episode out on the 19th, and I'm going to have one out next 19th. It's easy to remember, 19 Nocturne Boulevard. I also do readings from old sci-fi public domain stories as Atomic Julie's Galactic Bedtime Stories. And those come out weekly with slight commentary occasionally. And I host a cold read session twice a week that welcomes actors and writers. That you can find more about that if you reach out to me on Twitter at 19 Nocturne. That's 19 Nocturne. And finally, for all your audio drama needs, I also am AD Infinitum, which on Twitter, which is at _D_infinitum. It's the one with the microphone if you get confused. Because there are other things called AD Infinitum. I had to go with the underscores. And I tweet shows constantly on there that are coming out that are old and don't exist anymore, but you can still download. I mean, I'm trying to cover everything and I have huge lists.
I can't say too much at this time. I am working on the very early stages of a different story, similar to my first audio drama podcast, The Path Down, which was a loose retelling of Dante's Inferno. I can say what I'm working on now is an equally loose retelling of the Hades and Persephone mythos. And that's a whole new endeavor that I'm working on. And I'm really excited about it. And that's all I can say about that. If people are interested in following me specifically and seeing what I'm up to, I am on Twitter at the Leslie Gideon. From there, you can see all the different projects I get up to, all the different collaborations that I've worked on. If you're interested in specifically The Path Down, which is a limited run sci-fi audio drama, it's all out now. You can listen to it in one go. That is at The Path Down, also on Twitter.
Well, thank you guys all so much for participating. This has been so enlightening and so enjoyable. So I hope everybody has found it informative and inspired, and you're going to move on and go create your own passions, whatever they may be. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and you guys have a great day.